Hello again and welcome to another English language A-level video. This one is all about language discourses. So it's getting you ready for the AQA Paper 2, Section B, Language Discourses question. Let's have a look at that question. So in this whole section, time-wise, you'll be spending an hour and 45 minutes-ish answering the two questions. In the first question, you are given two texts. And the two texts are about one particular linguistic subject, and they're usually written for a kind of well-read, non-specialist reader. So there are a couple of examples. You might get, for example, a Daily Telegraph article about the influence of American English on British usage. So there you are, the Daily Telegraph, so that's a British right-wing conservative broadsheet newspaper. And that might be coupled with a Daily Mail news article on the same subject about Americanism. So Daily Mail, also a right-wing conservative newspaper, but a so-called blue-top tabloid newspaper. And the question would be, analyse how language is used in text A and B to present views about whatever it is. Okay, so if you have a look at the AOs on the bottom there, this gets a mark in total out of 40. And you can see how it splits down. So your AO1 is out of 10. Now your AO1, remember, is your use of key terms, linguistic key terms, and it's also about your written expression. Okay. Your AO3, on the other hand, is about meanings and representations, and it's also about knowledge about context as well. And your AO4 is about comparison, and you've got to make sure that your written answer is totally comparative all the way through. So that's your question 3, and then your question 4, on which you'd spend something like 45 to 50 minutes, is this, where you write an opinion text about, in this case, Americanisms, in which you assess the ideas and issues raised in text A and text B and argue your own views. Now in this video, we'll only have a look at the question 3. Okay, so these language discourse texts that you are given, they're going to discuss a similar kind of topic area, and the topic area could be from language diversity, or it could be from language change, or it could be a kind of blend of both of those broad areas. So, for example, it could be about regional accent prejudice. It could be about the speech of teenagers. It could be about gender bias in the English language. It could be about world Englishes. It could be about people's attitudes towards language change. So there are 5 examples there of possible topic areas. The two texts may be unequal lengths. Look out for that, because when you're doing a comparison, it's straightforward to find things to write about a longer text, but it can be quite challenging when the second text is quite meagre. So they may be unequal in terms of length, and they're probably going to be written for contrasting kinds of implied audiences. By implied audiences, I mean, of course, target audiences. So that's a key discriminator in the language, and if you're going to be analysing AO3, you need to be showing awareness that, the journalist has written it for a particular type of reader to respond in a particular type of way. So the two pieces, they may be opinion articles, or indeed they may be news reports with some opinions thrown in by experts. They may feature a variety of different viewpoints about language, not just one stance. So it'd be unusual if you just get a text that is completely, let's say, prescriptive from start to finish. Often they are quite mixed and varied within these individual texts. They also, because this is advanced level English, they're likely to be quite challenging to understand in places. So you might get quite a complex argument from a broadsheet newspaper. And the point about these texts is that they tend to be written by journalists rather than academics, and therefore they may not be supported by data-based research. Now, let's go back to the basics on what do we mean by discourse. So a discourse can be defined as that. So it's a way of thinking about, talking about, arguing about, or describing how we feel about something. So, for example, when talking about, say, sport or politics, a discourse of conflict is often used. Metaphors such as ambushed, attacked, and fought might be used to describe actions on the pitch or in Parliament. So the best way to think about discourse is in terms of semantic fields. Try and use that word discourse as much as possible in your question 3 answer. So discourses help to frame the way that we think about the world. And it's the linguist Norman Fairclough who argues that essentially language is involved with the struggle for power, and that ideologies are closely linked to language, because using language is the commonest form of social behaviour where we rely on common sense assumptions. So always try and look out in the texts for the way that language and power are kind of linked together. When we're writing about the discourses, quite often you're going to be using these terms about whether the journalist is prescriptive or apparently descriptive in their attitude. Attitudes can be classified in those 2 different binary ways, although of course most of the time they're somewhere in the middle of those 2 binary opposites. So a prescriptivist dictates how people should speak and write, whereas a descriptivist avoids passing judgment and provides explanation and analysis. And generally what you're doing on an A-level course is a descriptive approach where you are avoiding passing judgments, and you're basically trying to explain why language has been used in certain ways in certain contexts. So one says what ought to happen, i.e. that's the prescriptive point of view, and the other one says what does happen, that's the descriptive point of view. And that's a quotation from Henry Hitchings in The Language Wars. Little exercise for you to do here. So here are 5 discourses on the left, and on the right hand side you have to find the quotation that best links in with that particular discourse. I would invite you to pause the video there and link the red left hand discourse with the right quotation. Have a go! Right, so if we think about evolution, that surely would be languages can crossbreed in a way that species do not. So what the quotation shows is the flexibility of language in aspects such as lexical borrowing and grammatical change. And this is a descriptive point of view. It shows the power of the language to change. Disease, we've got English has been infected and weakened by text messaging and online abbreviations. So this presents English as a victim. Notice its position syntactically in the sentence there with the passive voice. Has been infected, has been weakened. This links in very nicely to the linguist Jean Aitchison's infectious disease analogy. That's explained in your AQA textbook on page 219. And here it's blaming technological developments. So it's heavily prescriptive in its viewpoint. We have decay. So the English language is like a crumbling castle, a once great building, now on the verge of collapse. Now this is another one of Jean Aitchison's analogies. Again, it's on page 219 in the AQA textbook. It's highly prescriptive. It's that nostalgic notion that sometime in the past there was this golden age of language. And so it suggests that the complete collapse of the language is imminent. We then have here about purity. So English has become polluted by ugly Americanisms. So this is the prescriptive idea that English in the past was pure and that American English is aesthetically bad for the language. Notice how we've got the subjective pre-modifying adjective ugly. And again, the passive voice has been used, has become polluted. So the passive voice is used to portray language as a victim. It's a victim of this external corrosive influence. And then finally, you've got conflict. Standard English is now in a state of war against the invaders. American English, online slang, and Jaffakan. So we've got lots of hyperbole here. We've got a kind of hyperbolic slogan that's being used. And it's pretty ironic, isn't it, that when you think about language, which is supposed to be a tool of communication that's bringing people together, here it's being represented as a weapon of conflict. So the blame is being placed on the usual suspects, technology, other cultures, and just focusing on that word Jafaican. That's not a linguistic word. That's a journalistic label that's used. So it's pejorative, and it's somehow suggesting, that word Jafaican, that people's language is somehow inauthentic. Okay, so there gives you a little bit of practice of the sorts of ideas that might be running through the two texts that you're looking at on question 3 of language discourses. Here are some common discourse metaphors about language then. We have metaphors of correctness, where language is seen as either right or wrong, it's either correct or incorrect. We have discourses quite often about morality, that language use is seen as being either good or bad, and therefore its users are being seen as, moral or immoral, good or bad. Quite often language is couched in terms of conflict discourses. So arguments are framed about being two sides in opposition to each other. And also decline. So language is represented as undergoing a kind of steady decline from a once great peak in the past. And then here we've got 3 other common discourse metaphors about language. We have pollution, where language is represented as pure, but perhaps at risk of pollution. We have infection and disease, where change or variation is seen as a sort of threat to the health of the language, and it's weakening it and damaging it. And quite often invasion is also used as a discourse. So language is seen as under threat from outside forces. Okay, so quite often when you're analysing question 3 texts, you're going to see these sorts of metaphors and discourses running through. So when you're analysing your question 3, this is the technique that you should be using. First of all, you read your given paired text and scribble down in the margin the ideas, because it's all very well pointing out some of the linguistic features, but the really key objective here is AO3, where you're writing about meanings and representations. So what are the key ideas that, as these texts unfold, how are they revealing themselves paragraph by paragraph? So summarize the key ideas. When you've done that, you might want to then have a go at doing your intro paragraph, in which you summarize comparatively what you think are the main ideas of the text. And I'll show you an example of that in a minute. Don't make your intro paragraph go on and on. I mean, don't write more than half a side, for example, on the intro paragraph. Then obviously you need to be going back through the texts, and you do have an hour to do this, so there's plenty of time for you to be doing this quite slowly and deliberately. You need to be annotating the 2 texts in terms of the sort of linguistic choices made by the writers and how they're positioning the audience to think and feel. And this is your chance to identify those AO1 key terms. They're very important, because you want to mark yourself out as a proper advanced level English language student, not just like GCSE level. And then you need to be writing the rest of your answer. So remember to show that you understand the ideas presented in different parts of the 2 texts. So it wouldn't be worth your while, for example, spending a whole paragraph where you just write about pronouns, where you didn't link the ideas on pronouns to the meat of the topic. Okay, so always link your linguistic points to the actual meanings that are going on. It is also useful to use these words prescriptive or descriptive to show where people's positions appear to be based on these texts. You clearly need to be writing in 4, 5 or 6 very clear paragraphs with very clear comparative topic sentences, and I'll give you some examples of that in a minute. And you want to be applying different language levels. So weaker responses tend to focus just in on words, where stronger responses are doing all sorts of things with different language levels. So lexis, semantics, pragmatics, but also grammar, maybe graphology, discourse, etc. So show an understanding of the range of different language levels. And then, of course, keep using this abstract noun discourse frequently. The text A draws upon the discourse of conflict, for example. Let me now show you an example of an introductory paragraph in which you are summarizing comparatively the main ideas of the texts. So here we go. Hansen, writing online for an adult audience interested in news and social comment, argues that Selfridges is right to insist on its staff using fewer localized language forms in dealing with non-local customers. Notice there's nothing fuzzy about this. You know, the summary is very, very precise about what this text is about. So there we've got AO3 context. It also identifies the mode and the audience because it says that it's written online and it's written for an adult audience. So that's important in terms of identifying the AO3 context. So you've got the meanings, which are summarized very clearly there in that first sentence. Second sentence, Queen of Fern, responding to other users' comments, defends Hansen's views, arguing the importance of upholding correct and civilized forms of language and behavior. Okay, so there you've got more AO3 meanings where concisely you've got the text B argument that's being summarized. Final sentence, both writers promote overall prescriptive stances, though Hansen's article also acknowledges a number of descriptive views. So we've got AO1 key terms. So this writer is identifying where the writers stand on the prescriptive, descriptive continuum. And you've also got comparison going on there. So that use of the word both there shows similarity, but difference as well between the two texts. Now that is the sort of thing you must be doing quite concisely in your first paragraph, where you're showing that you really understand the meanings of the text. Once you've done that, then obviously you need to be constructing really good topic sentences. And the topic sentences really need to be based around the lexicon of comparison. So these words on the left-hand side here are all showing similarity, whereas those words on the right hand there are showing dissimilarity. And the trick on this within every paragraph is to try and show both similarity and dissimilarity if possible. So here are some example comparative topic sentences finally. So the language in the headlines establishes contrasting language discourses. What a beautiful topic sentence that is. It's, you know, because what you're doing is you're forensically examining the language of the headlines and you're linking it into this idea of discourses. Second example, both opening paragraphs use language to present personalized experiences. Well, there you go, because the opening paragraphs, obviously, those articles, they have to engage you by having a really interesting opening. Otherwise, you're not going to be tempted to read the rest of it in the real world. So what's going on in the opening paragraphs? Well, that topic sentence is suggesting that the writers are drawing upon kind of anecdotal, personalized experiences. Here we've got a couple of topic sentences which are about grammar. So both texts use pronouns to position the audience's responses. So it's looking at a specific aspect of grammar here on pronouns. And what I recommend that you do in terms of pronoun is look at three different types of pronoun. So you've got your first person singular pronouns, like I, me, and my, which is often about personalized anecdotal experiences. So first person singular pronouns. You then have first person plural pronouns like we, us, and our, which are often used in a kind of inclusive collective way. And then you've got your second person pronouns, okay, which are often used for direct address. And basically you could use the word synthetic personalization there. It just so happens that in English, our second person pronouns are the same for both singular and plural. So quite often when a journalist uses that second person pronoun, it's very handy because it can feel like you're being addressed personally as an individual. And of course, that journalist is addressing a collective mass of people as well. So there's tons to say about pronouns. The trap, of course, is to get carried away in pronouns and not to relate it to the meanings that are going on in the text. So it's very important that you do that. A second aspect of grammar which could be useful is to look at sentence forms, by which I mean variations in terms of sentence functions, like declaratives, imperatives, exclamatives, interrogatives. So are there variations in those sentence functions? And also, are there variations in sentence types as well? So simple sentences, compound sentences, complex sentences. So in both texts, the writers vary sentence forms to develop their arguments. Here are some other possible comparative topic sentences. The endings of the texts leave the reader with contrasting messages. Both texts draw upon pragmatic references which assume readers' schematic knowledge. And in both texts, modifiers help guide the reader's responses, by which I mean adjectives and adverbs or adverbials. Those are modifiers. So you notice that if you're sitting there scratching your head thinking, well, how am I going to structure my answer? Quite a good way of doing it is to base it around your language levels. So here it's just focusing on modifiers. So you could argue that it's either about lexis or it's about grammar. Here you could argue, well, this is all about pragmatics. Here, because it's just about one area of the text, you could say, well, that's about discourse. And as I've said earlier, these two here, these are about grammar. So you're drawing upon your different language levels. You need to construct about 4, 5, 6 of them to do a really good answer. That concludes my little video about doing a question 3. In the next video, I'm going to talk you through about a question 4 language discourses opinion article. See you then. Thank you.